Okay. All right. Well, good evening and welcome to the First Family Support Group, which is brought to you by NAAP, the National Association of Adoptees and Parents. It's our mission here to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. I'm your facilitator, Amber Jimerson. If you're new here and new to NAAP, you can follow us on social media, the National Association of Adoptees and Parents on Facebook, or our Instagram here at First Family Support. If you're not familiar, we are a support group, but we meet monthly on the second Thursday, but then we like to do these guest speaking events that are open to all every few months. And so as always, I would like to remind everyone that during these events, we're hearing perspectives and stories that are not our own. And it's our goal here to just validate one another, show our support, and learn to build bridges of compassion across experience and generations. So the plan here is, too many things going on at once. So Amy's going to speak for us, and then after that, there will be a session for just Q&A. But please, as she's speaking, don't hold back, you can type in the chat. We'll get through the comments and questions at the end. Feel free to encourage her as she's speaking. If you'd like to ask anything anonymously, you can message me directly or Amy, and we'll be sure to get those covered in the Q&A. So with that disclosure out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest this evening, Amy Seek. Amy is a landscape architect and an author living in New York City. And as she will tell us about tonight, she's also a birth mother. And recently, Amy, alongside fellow birth parent Ridge House, co-hosted a 6-week writing group for first parents back in the fall. I will include a link to her book in the chat. On a personal note, I first heard of Amy back in 2015 when her book came out, because a friend of mine who has no ties to the adoption community saw it and was like, maybe Amber would like to read it. And it was just such a journey. That's one reason I did invite her here to speak, is that I think we have heard a lot of stories, maybe from closed adoptions, or in my experience, semi-closed adoptions, and with the norms surrounding adoptions changing, it often feels like we're sort of just waiting and just very curious to see what are those stories going to be like. And Amy's is one of those stories. So with that, let's welcome Amy.
Thank you, Amber. Well, this talk is called Navigating Openness in Adoption. And I wanted to be clear, Amber's already said it, but that this is all coming from a birth mother's perspective. I am not a professional counselor or therapist or social worker or any of those things. I am a landscape architect and a birth mother in an open adoption, which is the entirety of my qualifications for speaking here. My intention for this presentation is to walk through the stages of adoption as I experience them, and reflect on what I feel contributed to making our open adoption good, for the lack of a better word. And where I think, the places where I think we'd have benefited if I'd done it differently. It's not necessarily guidance for everyone. Everyone has different circumstances, different setup, different experience. So take this simply as me today, 22 years after placing my son, giving guidance to me at each stage. And as a writer and doing presentations like this, I really try to dig deep into my own experience, because I think birth mother experience needs more thorough and more deep representation. Before the birth, I was told by adoption materials and by counselors who had never given up children for adoption that what this would feel like is a loss and it would get better. That sounded like something I could handle, really manageable. So it's valuable for birth mothers to elaborate on that loss, for one thing, so that women considering it know what they're in for, and to scare potential adoptive couples away if they're not ready for this level of complexity, and so that we can change things and invent better ways to support women, to support each other. So that is my introduction. And this was a little bit of an experiment in making this a visual presentation. I've never done this as a visual. I've never spoken about adoption as a visual presentation before, but that's what I'm going to do. Just let me know if it's visible. You can see it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so my adoption is 22 years old. My son is 22 years old. And things are constantly changing, but these are the big chapters so far. As I've experienced them, it's our period, this period before the birth, before the signature. There's birth, there's what I've started calling acute open adoption. There was the milestone when he began to reflect back to me. There's chronic open adoption, and then there's writing. And just this past weekend, my son was visiting. He had returned from a semester in Paris for Christmas with his family, and then he came to New York to visit me. We were walking through Chelsea, and I told him about this talk, and I asked him if he has any ideas for navigating open adoption. How can we do it better? And he said simply, and with this kind of annoyed grin, no. And it was very clear he had nothing more to say. I took it to mean, why spend energy trying to refine a very flawed thing? Address the issue. And we debated whether open adoption can be done well when it's sitting on top of so much trauma and loss. Maybe an adoption can be done a little bit better or worse, but in the end, it's all spinning around the same axis. And this is something that I'm sure this group could talk a lot about. And yeah, I also have to say that yes, we do have choice. It might be small, but we have choice. And we have constantly renewing opportunity to make our life something that we want to live. And this is kind of the human project, because I feel like, yeah, a lot is sitting on trauma and loss. So I'm a visual person. This is my playing with making this a visual presentation. I asked my son if he was okay with my using photos, and I chose to hide his and everyone's faces when they're identifiable here. So the brief story, I was dating a super smart guy in architecture school in Ohio. Back in 1999, I was 2 years into school and I still had 4 years to go for my bachelor's. We've been dating a while. I loved him, but I was really far from ready for marriage. I had just had my first trip overseas, and it felt like everything I've been waiting for had just started. And so it felt really premature to stop everything and get married. So when I got pregnant, we broke up. But there's no question that he would be part of the decision-making about the child. We considered abortion, but I couldn't go through with it. And when I found out about open adoption, it struck me as a brilliant solution. It meant not really giving up the child and not giving up my dreams. My boyfriend didn't think I could give up a baby, but it didn't seem like we had any other option, so he agreed to move forward with it. It made so much sense, it pleased everybody. This is a note from my dad. You've got some proud parents here in Tennessee. His parents, I mean, my boyfriend's parents, my friends, my professors, everybody was really impressed with this option. Open adoption changed how my situation was perceived. While all of the other students were just designing buildings in architecture school, I was doing that, drawing with my hands, and with my belly, I was creating a child to give away to a deserving family. And here's my guidance from me now to me then. And I do think this is pretty universal. But the depth of it that you can experience as a birth mother, that I have experienced as a birth mother, I have spent 22 years learning how important this is. I didn't seriously consider raising him as a single mother. I grew up in Tennessee with this irrational fear of becoming homeless, this extreme sense of my proximity to poverty. The only single mothers I'd ever heard of were really marginalized. They dropped out of high school and they disappeared. And on top of that, my ex-boyfriend didn't want to be an absent father while I single parented. So we embarked on open adoption through Catholic Social Services. I was 2 or 3 months along, and Catholic Social Services gave me 9 profiles to choose from. And those couples seemed really nice. They were smiling at us through these photos taped to the pages, but they were not my child's parents. I knew that for sure. And we were smart and we were resourceful, and we started a mission to search high and low to find a family for our child. I recognized quickly that I would have a really short window of power and I needed to use it. Another thing I would love to tell myself, that window of power is a lot larger, a lot longer than you think it is. I took free childbirth classes and enlisted a volunteer doula. I got counseling from multiple crisis pregnancy centers and Catholic Social Services. I read all the materials I could find on what it means to be a birth mother. How does one give up a child? I went to chat rooms. I reached out to every agency listed online to request more profiles. It was 1999. The internet was new, and this was how I learned to use it. And for a really long time, I really thought I did a great job of this. One of the things I was counseled to do at Catholic Social Services was keep my son in some kind of alternative arrangement. Don't sign away your rights, just get some help for 5 years. Like, is there anybody who could help? My counselor really persisted on these questions. Maybe take some time off school, take a pause, maybe move in with family. You don't need to get married, but you and your partner, your boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, she said we work really well together, and could we imagine co-parenting? And I didn't let myself think about those scenarios because making something new in the midst of chaos felt so messy and dangerous. And I knew that I didn't actually want my parenting rights severed. I really just wanted support I could count on so that I could continue school. And I now see it as super important to consider those ways of making families that don't start with fiction and don't generate profit for people who don't have to live with the situation. But that was just something I could not see at the time. We received hundreds of profiles. It became very clear very early that there were far more amazing waiting families than there were healthy infants to give away. We made a list of 111 questions that we typed up and we sent to each family so that we could more fairly compare them one against the other. The questions were a minefield. You could answer one wrong, and it wasn't that there was like a real right or wrong, an objective right or wrong. It was just that my heart would sink, my body would know those are not his parents. And I looked and looked for opportunities to uncover that they were not right. My boyfriend said he thought that I was determined to find something wrong with people, and yes, I was. I was determined to find the thing that would make me regret choosing them before we chose them, before we had no rights, before we had no power. So we offended people. We lost potential couples who didn't want to spend so much time responding to us, who felt that the questions were invasive. And we had so much to read. It was exhausting in architecture school. And so my today self would encourage myself then to ask all the questions. Why I chose the family I did, and this is not the family, it's just one of the millions. They didn't have a nursery. Their lives were not stalled, waiting for a baby. I could tell they were committed to openness. We envisioned several similar things, a very natural relationship that wouldn't be like defined by a contract. But what it came down to was just this deep feeling of trust, this instinctive trust on both my and my boyfriend's part. We still had time once we decided, yeah, these are the ones, we don't really need to talk to anybody else. I was still pregnant, and we we settled on them and we got to know them a little bit better for the last few weeks of my pregnancy. We had visits and emails and phone calls. My professor said we deserved an A+ for how we dealt with the situation and how hard we worked to find the right couple. And I agree, we really did. Working so hard to find the couple certainly led to our adoption being open, remaining open. But with 2 decades reflection, I have thought many times, awesome as they are, I wish we hadn't found them. The selection process completely sideswiped my time and energy during the pregnancy and allowed me to avoid the question of whether I wanted adoption in the first place. And along the way, in being seduced by the magic of open adoption, I made the mistake of becoming a kind of advocate for it, being really bold about it, as if I planned this whole thing from the start. And I wish I had shared with people and been more honest with myself, like that I wasn't really sure, like how could I be sure? But I was so bolstered by seeing people see me as in control that I didn't want to express any doubt. It was later after the birth that I found out that my confidence had caused people who were going to offer me support in keeping my child. They decided not to. They didn't want to confuse my certainty. I just talked to my best friend from that time about a month ago, and she said it was very clear to her that this is not what I really wanted. And it was also very clear to her that there was no stopping me. And so she had never even told me that she felt that way. My today self would tell myself then, tell everybody in your family. I made the mistake of listening to my mom, who was part of the generation who thought it should all remain a secret, even from within our own family. And so I didn't tell my grandmother, who I found out later strongly objected to my giving him up and would have helped me. I didn't know that until weeks after my son was adopted. The intimacy of the relationships, the late night conversations, how invested the couple seems to be in you, in your health, and how you're feeling is so powerful and leads to a sense of implicit commitment. With all of those late nights, and by the time of the birth, they were deep in it with me. Okay, so the next image is right after my son was born. It's a tiny bit graphic, just a newborn baby with some baby goo on him and me exhausted, but I wanted to give you guys a warning in case you don't want to see it, or you don't, or you want to prepare yourself to see it. But I think this is a beautiful photo, and I'm so glad my doula took it. So the time passed and I went into labor. We were at an outdoor sting concert with the family we'd chosen. They had traveled hours to be in town for my due date, and we were just waiting for the birth. That now all strikes me as a very big mistake. Birth changed my feelings in ways that I was told to anticipate, but of course, anticipating how you're going to feel after birth is not possible. It gave me a clear understanding, birth gave me a clear understanding of who my son and I were to one another, that made the adoption plan feel absurd. But the new understanding was unspeakable on account of having made the adoption plan and committed, although not legally, to the family. And that image is gone now. Before the birth, I succumbed to the temptation to give the family the satisfaction of being picked, leading to them pausing their lives to be with me for the birth. My intention was that he should be able to start his life with them as soon as possible, so they'd have that immediate connection. But I didn't know until the birth the extent to which his connection had already been formed with me, and how deeply I would feel in my body that it was really important that we sustain that connection. I didn't know for how long, but I knew we needed to sustain it, and that they didn't need to be there. I planned the birth really carefully. My doula, who's this amazing person, she advised me that I should plan the birth I wanted, never mind if I'm giving him up. Or in fact, it was really like, if I'm going to give him up, it would be all the more important to make the birth amazing. And it would be my last time with him as his mother. It should be beautiful. So we planned for this natural childbirth. I had a birth plan and she helped me stick to it. I delayed going to the hospital, instead spent time at home, and 18 hours in, we took a walk by this pond at sunset, pausing for my contractions. And she just wanted me to have this time with him. But doing the birth this way wasn't only because I thought it was going to be the healthiest thing. She coached me that it would be the healthiest thing for him. It was also because I thought it would be useful in my decision making. I was advised not to have a natural childbirth, not to breastfeed, not to take him home. But that advice was based on not wanting to compromise the adoption plan. And I wanted very much to test the adoption plan, to take on all the pain that I could and see if my body could tell me what to do. I knew what I wanted, but I had made such good plans that I needed my body to force me to hear it. So I decided to take him home, but because I planned so well, I had nothing. I had no stroller and no diapers and no clothes and no nothing. It felt insane to have a newborn baby in my little studio apartment. All the people who had been so happy were so upset. And as crazy as it felt to have him, it also felt like the most natural, the most comfortable, the most awesome thing in the world. I just wish I'd done a little bit of planning. I'm convinced that part of why we're close now, me and my son, has to do with the couple of weeks I kept him after the birth, when we played with him, sang to him, breastfed, and slept with him. I'm convinced that breathing shared oxygen gave him some kind of stability in his body. I thought from the beginning that my period of power was limited to that period of being pregnant. And I really wish I had realized that the power was not in being pregnant, the power was in not having signed. And that I would have opportunity to give him up for adoption in a month, in a year, if that's what I really wanted. But there was no urgency to let him go when I wasn't ready to let him go. They called me one day, the adoptive couple who was still waiting, and they told me that they were going to go back home because understandably they couldn't keep their life indefinitely on pause. I was terrified. I didn't have a runner-up couple. I began to work on an actual plan to parent. I thought if they're leaving, I got to figure out how I'm keeping him. I called the university daycare and they gave me pricing, which I couldn't afford, and told me about the year-long waiting list. So I panicked and I couldn't see any way to move forward from the kind of limbo that I was in to driving to work on Monday. So I shut down. I went back to the pond where I labored. I went to the agency, I signed. It was a big moment for both of us. It was a new life for my son. And it was my first step into this territory of disowning my most natural desires. I was so relieved to have made a decision after all of the chaos of the whole pregnancy, of everything, that I didn't even have the energy to contemplate revoking my surrender once I'd given him up. I wish I'd prepared myself, not just for the time until the birth, but that I had reserved energy for the revocation period, which I don't even know what it is. I think it might have been 30 days in Ohio, but I didn't even think about it. I wish I'd been counseled to regard the revocation period as part of the process, and that revocation itself would be a perfectly acceptable decision. It was really silent when the adoption was over. Everyone who had been scrambling around me was gone. My son was gone, and there was not really anything to do but get ready for school. I knew that things would change after the birth, but I had no idea how alone I would be with the grief. Everyone was blank. Nobody could know how to be around it, how to advise me or what to say. And with what was left of the summer, I flew to LA for a family trip, seeing my sister off to China. And it was like we were back to normal. And then school started, and I was back to my design studio just like it had never happened. And this period of time I've started calling acute adoption began. A rhythm began of plane rides and train rides and bus rides and car trips. I traveled to see my son every 2 or 3 months, no matter where we each lived, starting just a few months after he was born. Unlike a lot of the open adoptions I know about now, this openness was real. I really got to visit him whenever I could afford the time. And then I'd return. I started dating a guy who wasn't in school. He was an alcoholic and periodically homeless because he got it. He got sadness. It didn't scare him a bit. And that would be one of the first decisions I made after adoption that I probably shouldn't have made. But I kept this rhythm as my son grew. I would call them up and I would ask to come for the weekends. And then I'd return as if nothing had happened. So this period of acute adoption began when my life split in this way. And the acuteness of those 18 years came from the intensity of being near him and pretending that he was not mine. I was always aware of his parents' presence during our visits, and I didn't want to be threatening. And so I embraced my son casually and I let go quickly. And I didn't tell him that I loved him. I didn't want to seem hungry for him because I wanted to be invited back. And I didn't even feel a hunger for him in his presence. I felt dead, numb, robotic. The word gaslighting wasn't familiar to me then, but I find it really useful as a way to describe the surreality of the experience of the rhythm of our open adoption visits. I understand it to mean this kind of doubt in the truth of your perception, to participate in false reality and loss of certainty about what's real, which didn't originate with the adoptive family. I felt it just as the kind of mechanics of open adoption. My own sense of reality was destabilized in my son's home, and I felt obligated to conceal reality from my son. He knew I was his birth mother, but I was unable to be who I really was to him. I would take the most quick and careless selfie like this, and I would study it intently later and try to understand, like, what does this mean? I couldn't treat him like the child I'd breastfed. There was only this kind of sociable, physical affection, a hug when I came or went, and no particular favor over the other adopted children in his family. And I graduated 3 times. The first time, they traveled 500 miles to attend. And when I visited them, I shared only entertaining stories of my own life, things that masked the loss, any evidence of the impacts of the loss, stories that made us laugh, stories that made it seem like I'd moved on. I didn't look forward to visits at all. But visits were a rite of my birth motherhood. I performed them religiously. Even though exposure to my son felt like opening my eyes in a horror movie. With every visit, I educated my body that he wasn't mine. And at the same time, I desperately sought evidence that my connection to him wasn't a dream. I found myself in his presence in a completely dissociated state. Visits left me speechless and exhausted. And as he grew older, I started to think that surely he would want to see signs that the loss of our original relationship had made some impact on me, that I missed him. But for the sake of the new family and their stability and the ongoing ability to see each other, I was determined to hide that. What I had expected from the term openness was a kind of flowing of truth between everyone. And what I learned is that there's only so long you can freely talk about how weird you feel and how painful it is once the kid is born and the family has started. Your evolving opinion about the experience becomes irrelevant and potentially damaging when the commitment has been made and there's no room for the feelings to change the basic organization of the relationship. And so there developed this sense of theater about visits. I played this part where I was still glad this was our situation, that I knew how to be a birth mother, that this was all under control and going to plan. The theater felt like it was for his benefit, but I also found myself screaming inside, looking at him really intensely to communicate to some deep part of him, or receive communication back that that would feel real between us and make me less confused. It was just like, I'm here, I'm your mother, and what does this mean? My today self has a really hard time knowing what to say to myself then to make it easier. So I would just say a few things that visiting taught me that I wish I had known before I signed. The visiting isn't anything like resuming your former role, and it doesn't feel like motherhood. That I would have this ambivalence about being around him when he was little. It wouldn't feel just like magic or like being around my favorite person. It wouldn't feel like a feast. Loving him would become theoretical and at a distance, and there was nothing to feed it. It was in my head and had left my body. As I got older, it became harder to understand why they had him and I didn't. And to make it make sense, I would hold myself back. I would embrace being young and stupid so that it would make sense for somebody else to have my son. And in the early stages, when I was still really young, it was easier to perform my desire for them to have my son. It was easier to be young and stupid. They were college professors who owned a house and a car, and I was a long way away from that. So it made some sense that they should have the child. But in order for it to continue to make sense, I needed to continue to feel less capable and less stable and less equipped. And so I fabricated this sense of ineptness, irresponsibility, youth, even as I began a career that the adoption made possible. The older that I got, the less it all made sense. And that leads directly to the impacts on my career. Half of me embracing my career as the only thing that made giving him up make sense, and the other half hated my career, resented it, despised it for taking my son away. I never wanted my son to think my job was worth it, more valuable than him. So I kind of undermined my own career, and yet it was the only thing that I had. And so the only rational thing was to devote myself to it. And so there was just this flickering love-hate. There was a real handicap. That all my relationships would be impacted. This could be a book on its own, but I will summarize that I ran away from good. I found more than my fair share of really amazing, kind, lovely humans, and I ran away from them. The ways that my body would hold pain, which is another long story. That I would not have other kids. I do wish I could tell myself, my 22-year-old self, that this would be it. I believe if I'd kept him, I'd have had more. But losing him delayed everything. And then experiencing multiple miscarriages and infertility in my 40s, it was unthinkable to me because I deserved kids. And in the end, I had to do what the infertile people I'd met when I was 20 hadn't done: let go of the dream of having kids. The fact that it was possible for me made me know it's possible. This is a picture of my father with my son when he was about 5. The couple who adopted him could write their own books about open adoption, but I just want to say a few things about, from my perspective, things that they did really well. They said yes every single time I asked to visit. They visited me, they had my family visit them. They visited my family. They didn't reduce my visitation to create fairness with the other kids when the other kids weren't seeing their birth parents as much. They invited me to spend time alone with him during visits. They knew that there was some processing that needed to be away from them. They gave him my email, my phone number as soon as he could use those technologies. They introduced me to their friends. I didn't feel like a bracketed part of their lives. It was all very easy, it seemed, for them to integrate me into their larger life. And then they shared stories of their current lives and struggles. It was one of the most interesting things to sit down with my son's mother and just hear what's the latest, what's going on in their family. It felt very intimate and sweet. And this is my dad with my son when they visited a few years later when he had cancer. They drove to come here because they knew it was an important moment. My father got to supervise one of his many construction projects. They were repairing a zip line. And I had hoped that my son, even if he forgot my father, would somehow remember him in his body and remember him in hammering and sawing. They were very surprised, the adoptive family, to see him cutting, sawing this. And then when my dad had a last wind before his death, and he wanted to take a day to fly a glider, his glider, right before he died, my son's family came and each one of them took flights one by one with my father piloting. And it was no question that when my son wanted to join my family on various trips, he'd be allowed to. And also inevitable that he would become a favorite cousin. And it was precious for me to have him in my childhood home before we had to sell it. The first time my son reached out to me for contact was when he was 9. He'd just been given an email address by his parents, and he emailed me to tell me what his email address was and to ask me to email him. Being contacted for the first time at that young age was a precursor to really hearing from him, hearing how he feels about his experience, getting to know him as an adult. I was really eager for the moment when I could ask him, like, did this work and is everything okay? But in all my reading about the birth mother experience, I somehow failed to read about the adoptee experience. I think it was because he was so abstract. He was just too large. I couldn't name him. I couldn't conceive of who he would be as a human being. I didn't really think he would someday be an adult processing my decision as a fundamental fact of his existence. His father, my ex-boyfriend, used to say that he thought everyone involved was just too smart to experience trauma or to experience adoption as trauma. Around the time he turned 16 or 17, I was building up plans for a conversation with him. And I later learned he was building up plans for a conversation with me. The gist of what I wanted to tell him was, I'm your mother and I wanted you. And the gist of what he wanted to tell me, as I understand it, was that he wanted me in his life. So hearing from him, I learned that what I saw when I visited actually hadn't given me much of a window into how he was doing or what his life was really like. That when I inspected him closely for signs that adoption had affected him, the fact that I couldn't see it didn't mean that it hadn't. I found trust with his family when I selected them, and I'm glad about that because it had everything to do with being able to see my son throughout his life. But I had kind of equated my trust with chemistry, and maybe they smelled like me, and maybe that trust meant that they would have an easier time bonding with my son. And now I think my affection for the adoptive family didn't mean that my son would necessarily trust them. I have real doubts about if there's a right match in the way that I thought about it. Like, is there any correlation between a selection process as we do it, and that chemical compatibility? Is there such a thing as a family smelling right? I also learned that visits really do matter. It surprised me to learn that he remembered things I'd said to him at the time and that they'd meant something to him, and that as disembodied as I felt that he had seen me. And part of why it surprised me was because I had the same basic politics and values as his parents, so I was always seconding their opinions about things, not offering something new and rebellious. But he said somehow he could hear it better from me. And I learned that I had been there the whole time. My feelings of invisibility and dissociation were my own issue. They weren't real. I also began to understand that those visits would form the foundation of familiarity and comfort. When he was old enough to drive, he drove down to New York, and that was the beginning of his visits to me. The beginning of hours spent listening to Dave Brubeck in my kitchen and cooking and talking. But I'll talk about the chapter that his independence introduced for me. That weekend he came to visit. I went to sleep in our little bedroom nook. We had a tenement apartment, very small. And I had this kind of high-speed experience of the full spectrum of motherhood feelings. It was just the first time we had been in my apartment alone since he was born. It was really powerful. He went to sleep in the living room, and I started to worry, like, were the street lights too bright or the hallway noise too loud? And what had I done really to make a nice space for him? I should have probably made the bed face the opposite direction. Or I should have put blackout curtains on the living room windows to shield from the street lights. But had I put enough blankets on the bed, and should I have given him our bed? I should definitely have given him water. Would he feel comfortable getting himself water? When I woke, I made breakfast really quickly. I knew I wanted him to wake to a good smell. As I was cooking, I could see his feet hanging over the end of the bed, which reminded me of. Can somebody be muted?
2 weeks here, 23rd January. I never know what time I was born. I always wanted to know that I could do like my horoscope. I'm from Seattle, although I live in Hawaii. I ran for that one.
Trying to see if I can find. Okay, thank you. So I could see his feet hanging over the edge of the bed, and it reminded me of the couple of weeks that I kept him, and when I left him in the other room to cook when he was a baby, which was one of my favorite things in the world. Except that I wasn't scared of waking him then. I didn't know how to be a mother to him. Motherhood had become a head game and had left my body. When my son left his home and went to college, it changed something really small but significant for me. When I mention I have a son who's in college, his absence strikes everybody as perfectly unremarkable. The 20 years that we were apart are largely invisible, and that's somehow a great relief. I don't need to call his parents to coordinate a visit. I call him and I tell him freely that I love him. The current chronic stage of our adoption looks like the squeezed flat toothpaste tube and the flask of cologne left on the shelf in my linen closet, and his skateboard right there beside my sofa. He visits now often enough to have a dresser of shirts and socks and his own section of the bookshelves that are filled with mostly philosophy texts. It doesn't really appear like the remnants, unlike the remnants of a child off to college left in any mother's home. The thing that is missing is the missing. After 22 years, I'm familiar with his absence. His things thrown around the apartment feel like a a test of whether we fit. And after all these years, does it make sense? Being together, it feels like we're doing a lot of backwards work to fabricate what we didn't need to lose and can never fully recover. And visits are in that way still exhausting. And they're still worth it. So what I want, I actually am now in this moment. And so I haven't fully figured out what I want to say here. But a moment that so these are just, we have traveled, we have done stuff together. It's amazing to get to know him, and he's amazing. But what I kind of want to talk about as a kind of closing point, because we're beyond 45 minutes now, is I had a brief period that many of you on this call, I'm sure, have heard me talk about, of feeling like once I was safe from needing to please everybody, to please his family and be happy and light, I had this moment of needing to be really angry. I was angry at them, and I was, I had an impulse to indulge it, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's not what I'm saying, but I have recently been exploring this idea about my choice, like what choice do I have now? A lot is over, but life is every day new. And what do I have the choice about? And so I met up with my son's mother in this cafe and asked her what she would like our relationship to be now that he's gone, now that our relationships with him, they don't hinge on each other. We actually don't need to maybe see each other ever again. But they are in his life, and so they matter to me. And it was an amazing conversation that I'm still processing, of her openness, her having her own journey that I know only the tip of the iceberg about, her feeling differently about adoption than she did years ago, and there being real opportunity for us to be partners in something. And so I think I want to just end there, and just open this up for conversation or questions.
That was so great. and right on time. Okay, yeah, I've got things I want to say, but I'm gonna let's go to Susan. Susan, you got a question? You can unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go. Oh, you're still muted.
Okay, sorry about that. For some reason, I kept clicking it and I couldn't unmute. Anyway, first I want to say this has been a most moving presentation. Absolutely. It's really been beautifully done, and I've been very affected by it. I do have to admit I had to step away for a little bit of it. So the question I have, I apologize if you already answered. But what type of relationship did your son have with his natural father?
Oh, I should have mentioned that if I didn't. They continue to have a really close relationship. They visit each other regularly as well. I think he was every bit as regular as I was.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so he had a relationship with both of you throughout all his growing up years.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you.
We also had an anonymous question. Could you speak to what of an adoptive family who would like to have an open adoption, but the birth mother is not ready to meet and the child is 7?
I
Not
think,
that you're gonna have
I mean, yeah, it's very hard. I mean, I can just tell you that my desire to never visit again was overwhelming. And every single time I left, I had to console myself. You don't have to do that ever again. You don't have to go. You're gone, like you're out of there. You never have to go back. And I would just kind of lie to myself that I would allow myself that, so that I could live and survive. And then it would be a few days, and I would be like super sad, and then it would come back. And after a few weeks, I'd be like, I can do this. I should probably reach out. And so, yeah, and I don't think, so I would just think that there's a very strong survival mode and a very strong instinct that it can't be handled. I mean, it just, so I would suggest maybe persisting and persisting in the invitation. Don't be the thing. I'm totally not a professional, but I don't think that I don't know a way that it could be bad if everybody's safe for the child to know the birth mom or dad. And so to continue that invitation just feels like the right thing to do to me. And yeah, and maybe at some point she'll feel strong enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just for what it reminded me of is when you were speaking, I could really relate to maybe your stubbornness when you were pregnant. And I feel like we can look back and think, oh, I should have listened to this person or whatever, or I should have thought differently about it. But I don't think that you can really rush anyone or change their mind, and I think that goes for this as well. Like whether it's like they're pregnant and considering adoption and they just have their mind made up and no amount of guidance you give them is going to come through at that time. Maybe later in the future, they'll look back. But I also know some that just struggle so much with openness and visits. And I just don't know that there's anything you can do, to bring them that. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I've got lots of, yes. Okay, so I've got another direct message, and they did say they write an email. So I would say I'd agree, just like continuing and keeping that door open. Someone else said, I'm wondering if there are any ideas you can provide of how your son's adoptive parents could have made you feel more comfortable being yourself or having your feelings and connecting with your son without being concerned that another visit may not happen unless you present it in a certain way.
That is such a good question. And I think it really wasn't for them. It really was all generated. I basically was afraid to ask about the boundaries. We had decided this is going to be a natural thing. This is going to be like, we're just going to feel it out. And I was kind of really afraid to ask. I was afraid to make any mistakes. And so I guess the thing they might have done, although I don't think it was their responsibility, is to ask me, how do I feel about the way that we're organizing these things? And how do I feel about, do I feel comfortable in their house? Do I feel, just open up, actually be like, let's look at this relationship, not to say, do you like this adoption or not, but just let's talk about the, how we're doing this and if we're happy with how we're doing it. It doesn't have to be a super deep conversation. One of the major things was because I didn't want to touch any of the boundaries, I didn't know quite what they were. I think in retrospect, I can see there weren't really boundaries, but I was so scared there was so much at stake that I kind of I really straitjacketed myself and became numb. And I also succumbed to the kind of power dynamic that you can feel as a birth mother of they're better than me. Look at them. They're not like, one of the things was I wouldn't ask for water. I wouldn't get myself water. I wouldn't ask to eat. I would just wait for them to starve me. And I would kind of project a lot of things that I'm, who knows what's really going on for both of us. But I know that, in fact, I could have, well, now I'm not quite answering your question. I'm reflecting a lot on what I could have done and how much it would have been welcome for me to have this conversation. But I would say, if you can sit down and say, do you want us to be, actually, I just had this conversation with my son this weekend. I was like, when you come here, do you want to be a house guest, or when you come here, do you want to be my son? Like, do you want me to yell at you for leaving the ice cube tray on the counter? Or do you want me to wine and dine you because you're my house guest? And I would never yell at you for leaving the ice tray on the counter. And we had this conversation, and he was, I think it was good. And I never thought about doing that before, but that was a burning question in my mind of, how does he want to feel when you see her?
Oh, I like that. I have another one. If you're comfortable, could you speak more about, or I don't know, what do you think about your body holding the trauma over the years of visiting when he was young? Have you thought about that at all, or have anything to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's something specific intended with that question, but I had a big accident 6 years after he was born, and I continued to be treated for that accident with physical therapy. And it was breaking my hip, and kind of in the area of all the reproductive stuff. And I really feel like my body was just like, okay, we've got a physical pain. We've got an accident that makes this all make sense. I can limp and have constant pain, and then my head doesn't have to think about it. And I've had energy workers tell me this isn't from that accident. This happened before the accident, because that pain was just looking for a place to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't know if you've read through the chat. There are a lot of comments. No. Okay, so we've got, I don't have a question, but my birth son will be 14 in a few weeks, and you gave me much needed language for what I felt at times in our open adoption. Thank you so much for sharing. Another one was, he was a lucky boy to have you as a mother, and lucky to be able to know his first parents his entire life rather than the closed adoption system that we baby scoop era adoptees had to live with. Thank you. As an adopted parent, I need to hear this. Okay, and then this question I think was asked when you were speaking about these conversations that you would recommend having with adoptive parents just throughout the course of the adoption. And she asks, how do you feel about carrying the responsibility of these conversations? I find it hard to carry that grief and also feel responsible for the processing, regulating, and initiating in this relationship, and it makes me resentful.
And sorry, I might have, this is a birth mother.
Yeah.
Asking. Okay. Yeah, I don't mean to say that it's your job. I didn't mean to, I'm saying that when I reflect, I see that I could have done that. I think it's both people's job to make the relationship what they want. And so, and if you don't have it in you, that's why when I'm talking about acute adoption, I have a hard time talking about guidance for it, because it is just a survival. I don't know how I could have done that better. I don't know how I could have had that conversation with them, even though I can see I could have. So if you can, sometimes I find it when you make your mouth say words that you want to say, even though you don't feel like you can do it, that it can open up a whole world of things. And so even though I'm not suggesting that that it's your response, or it is your responsibility, because your life is your responsibility. It's like it's more of an opportunity that when you feel the strength, take it. And other than that, the only rule that I feel really strongly about is visit, 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 visit.
Mhm. I think one of the comments reflects that you're all navigating very new territory. There really isn't a manual. And then a couple of people wanted to know if it's not crossing a boundary, how did your son answer when you asked him? If he
Oh,
wanted
he said, you can, he said, not guessed. What did I say? If he wants to feel like my son, I actually can't remember if that's how I phrased it to him. I think I might have said, I think I might have been too shy to phrase it as
Mhm.
that. I think I might have phrased it as, do you want to feel like family? And he said the family thing, and that I could yell at him if I wanted to.
Jameson, you have got your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Amy, I was so moved by your presentation. And you know, and I know you, and I know how articulate and brilliant you are. And this just reinforces that for me. My heart was so touched. But on a more practical matter, it raises the question for me, is there a book coming?
Yeah.
To me, this is either going to be a book or a documentary.
The short answer is no, and my dream would be to continue to process and think about this and find ways to make the examination of birth motherness and grief make more of it. Yeah, I mean, but no, I can't even begin to think about that. That killed me. Even this presentation killed me. My son was actually here while I was looking through these pictures and just being like, oh, I can't open another folder. I can't open it. But I made myself open it and look at it. It's painful. I can see why we don't hear much, from birth mothers. It's too hard.
Linda?
Hi, Amy. You wrecked me. You just freaking wrecked me. Just, I'm a birth mother. I am in reunion with my daughter. I live with her and I see her every day and we have a beautiful relationship. It's almost 5 years old. And you've totally wrecked me tonight. And you can hear it. And I want to say to you, I'm so sorry for your losses. We mothers understand your losses. And I'm so glad. And you need to make this into a documentary. You absolutely need to make this into a documentary. Everyone needs to hear these words. You say it very articulately, beautifully. I love the addition of the beautiful photographs you used. You touched on the total experience. My adoption for my daughter was closed. So I missed the milestones you got to see, but I don't think I could have bared to be with the adopters and her and what you had to suffer through. This new open adoption is a new form of hell that I can't even comprehend. I mean, my own situation was a hell, but this is a hell. And you displayed it beautifully, and please make a documentary. Please make a documentary. These are important words. These are really important words. I'm glad that he's back in your life. I'm glad you have this chance to have a relationship. It's your time now. It is yours time with your son. And peace and love to you. And I'm going to go cry some more. So thank you very much. And please make a documentary. These words need to be heard by everyone, adopters especially, because this is the kind of hell that we suffer and the kind of hell that our children suffer through. Because then we do the work, but our children still have to hear and know that we've suffered as much as they have. So please make the documentary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Maureen. You're muted.
I'm trying to unmute. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. I have a little bit of a cold. Yes, this was really emotional. And thank you so much
for what you opened up about yourself. I had a closed adoption that took place in 1972, but what I'm really surprised about hearing is these open adoptions, you guys all have the same feelings. I'm
Hmm.
just blown away by this. I thought it would be better, but it's not.
Mhm.
I'm hoping too that we can hear more and more from birth mothers to get to the general public. Right now, I've been frustrated because one of my very best friends I've reconnected with, she's, I believe, disappointed that I don't look kindly on adoption, that it's been painful. And she was there with me right after I lost my son to adoption. So
Mhm.
recently too, though, I've been on Reddit, and there is a documentary supposedly coming out next year that I had some input on for birth mothers. And this is a Canadian television. I wish I could remember it right now. And there's also something else too that I had input on, all because I started opening up on Reddit and Quora, which are really good things because I've started to educate people that way for right now. But thank
Oh,
you so much.
I want to know the name of that.
You know, I'm gonna have to find it and write it into you because I have to tell you, both times I was interviewed by two different people, I felt like it was like therapy because I was a little shocked at how I felt. I felt validated after they asked me questions.
Yeah. Mm.
But thank you, Amy.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's definitely a thing that I want to communicate, that open adoption is not a solution to adoption.
Well, okay, so our next question is sort of on that track. So what would you say to adoptive parents on how to pursue or start openness? Maybe if they're going into a new adoption, but they just don't know how to navigate it. I'm
sorry, say that again.
What would you say to adoptive parents on how they can pursue open adoption, the openness part?
Is this after the adoption has started? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it is such a long-term commitment. My impulse is to say, like, really sit with it and be committed to doing it, and find out what the impulse is to do. But I think that a problem that exists in open adoption is that people think it's a hurdle to jump through. They'll jump through it and they don't think about what it means. And I recognize this person's already in the adoption and does want it. But I think there's there's just a pause of maybe of learning and maybe it's already been done, but I just feel like it's got to live really deep in you to like last. I'm sure, or no, I suspect that this was as exhausting for them as it has been for me in different ways. So, but the other thing is the same thing that we were talking about before. Invite it. When you know that you are committed to it, nothing's going to change that. Invite it in really gentle ways, and stay consistent in inviting it, and don't I don't know. I don't think that, I might be wrong. I can't speculate on what other birth mothers feel, because I do think that there are some that just really so much need to cope that they need you to not talk to them. But I also have a hard time imagining somebody, not some part of them, starting to hear an invitation and starting to think about it and it feeling in some part of them good. Even if the only thing is that you can send an invitation to be able to tell your child that, well, that's getting into a whole nother realm. I don't know, because then do they feel rejected because there wasn't a response? Never mind. I can't go beyond what I said.
I've got two. I want to check with Maddie. I saw your hand go up a couple of times. Did you have a question or comment?
I'm gonna collect my thoughts a little more.
Okay, so another person would like to know, when did you know it was okay to share your pain with your son over the adoption? Was it just waiting until he was of age and an adult? Were you worried about causing him more pain
Yes.
because of your pain and regret? Can you speak to that?
I was so worried. We are so trained that our pain doesn't matter. Like, your pain comes with the territory. The kid matters. I began to kind of like inch on this territory when he was a child. I would just say, I felt like I was inching in on the territory by just saying, does your sister see her birth parents? Because I'm kind of mentioning adoption, kind of, and by mentioning adoption, I'm kind of talking about like, I'm kind of stepping back and looking at this arrangement. And by doing that, I'm starting to kind of suggest maybe I had an experience and have opinions. It was so indirect, but I felt like I started seeding this conversation in very tiny ways when he was a kid. And then when he turned 18, like I was saying, or I think it was 18, or we both were planning this like thing. And I thought I did it. Actually, I thought I did it. And when we talked about it years later, he thought he did it, made this conversation happen. And so both of us were I was definitely kind of like shaking inside of like, am I allowed to do this? Is this like the worst thing that a birth mother could possibly do? Share what I felt about the whole thing. And so I gradually kind of was like, it wasn't what I wanted. That the big thing that I said to him was I did it out of fear. And I was so scared that would destroy him. But I had such a strong feeling of need to tell him. And I was so surprised. He kind of like just looked around and was like everything makes sense. Not everything makes sense. And I had, what was it that I was going to say? He thought that I didn't want kids up until like very recently. He told me that he thought maybe just I didn't like kids. And so of course I gave him up. That isn't exactly what he said, but this is my kind of remembering it. And that's how I took it. And I thought, oh my God, you thought I didn't want kids? It was so exactly not what happened. And I realized that the adoptive couple had not told him how I felt because they couldn't tell him exactly how I felt. They didn't know. I tried to hide it from them. And so they told him a story that they thought was true, and probably thought I was telling him my story. I don't know. But when I told him, I mean, I still every conversation, it opens up a little bit more of like, I can tell you a little bit more of my experience. And I'll think back, like, did my mom ever tell me how she felt? No, my moms don't feel anything. And so I think this isn't right for being a birth mother. This isn't right for being a mother of any kind to tell somebody how you feel. And then I'm like, but we have a different relationship. And I feel in him, I don't know if it's an 100% willing partner, but I feel like I have a partner in processing this whole thing. And so I forgot what question I'm answering. I genuinely forgot it.
I know, me too. No, I think you've answered it really well. Just when you knew it was okay to share with him.
Yeah. So when he turned kind of 18-ish, it started to feel.
Yeah.
But I wonder how long I could have gone without saying anything, you know?
there any other questions? I'm looking through here. I think what just struck me, I liked how you ended, and I liked that you chose to go speak to the adoptive mom, because I think early on in your talk, someone had made the comment, "This is making me terribly sad." And I think we all felt that way, but someone else said it was so raw, and it's important for people to understand the realities. And when you ended with that conversation with the adoptive mom, like, this is the acceptance of the reality of this rawness of every individual experience, like your individual experience, the birth mother's experience. And it's so important for you to be just so honest about what that actually looks like. And then there's the story of the adoptive mom. And like, I love that you're trying to move forward and ask, okay, what is this relationship going to look like? And to acknowledge all the complexity and the ambiguity. And your son as well, like that really is like, this is the reality of adoption. It's just this ongoing, this chronic thing that affects all of us. And so I have really, really appreciated, yep, okay, there's more comments. You're speaking on this. I think you've done a great job. And then Maddie, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, I'm a little bit more ready now. I'm in, I think, what you're calling the acute adoption, like kind of stage right now. And I'm really struggling with, you said, you know, you can only talk about grief and how awkward things are so often before things, you know, that it doesn't matter anymore. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, how was there a specific thought in your head of, oh, I want to share this or I don't want to share this? Because I'm feeling right now that any grief that I do feel is more of like a boundary or a hurdle to jump for all of us, you know, not just me, but for as adopted parents too.
How far along is your adoption?
He turned 1 in November.
Oh my God. So the question is kind of like, do you talk about the grief anymore to the adoptive couple? Is there any good that could come out of talking about the grief? Is that kind
that and also like maybe how did you decide what to share or what was too much or what was too little?
I didn't do it well. I just didn't do it well. I just shut down. I basically didn't talk to them about how I was feeling, other than kind of like I said, sharing like really happy stuff. And it felt like we needed, I don't know if that's true, but it felt like we needed a period of building the foundation and letting them be. Like it felt like enough that I could visit him. And so I am really not giving advice. I don't know. This isn't, I mean, I could imagine having felt a little bit more honest by saying, not bringing the grief to the moment, but saying, this is much harder for me than I thought. Kind of like, I could imagine, you know, kind of having the grief at a distance and saying that so that it doesn't feel like it's coming here and it's going to swallow us and I need to keep you out of my house. That is, so like putting an anchor in the ground or stating that so they understand all of this happy stuff I'm telling you is in the context of it's really hard. I feel like maybe if I could have been a tiny bit more transparent about that, it could have led to us having a few more conversations like, do you want to feel like a house guest or do you want to feel like family? And do you like how this is going? It could have led to them also stepping back and talking about how our relationship is working. And there was a point when I wanted to say, there was a point when I wanted to say to, I wanted to take the adopted mother out to lunch, and I wanted to say, do you want to like trade and I'll take him back? I really felt like I almost couldn't take another step forward in my life without asking her that question. And I didn't. You know, we need to talk to, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm so sorry. Amber or anybody who's just have something wiser.
No, it is great. Everything that you have said has really put some words to the feelings that I'm feeling because I'm very much in that lull that you talked about in the beginning, and kind of trying to find a way out or through or whatever that action word is. So I just appreciate you putting your experience out there. It's helpful.
Mhm. Yeah.
It was also really important for me to, at the beginning, I spent whole weekends there, and I can't believe I did that. And then over time, it started to just be an afternoon, and I felt bad because I felt like I was offending my son. I didn't like, how could I have this wonderful privilege and then not take full advantage of it for a whole weekend? I just couldn't live if I did that. It was too much of that surrealness. And so I allowed myself to be like, a little touch in his life is okay. And as much as I also started to eat something before I went, which I had been not eating before I arrived, and then starving to death while I was with him. And I started to be like, wow, I could actually feed myself. And so I started coming a little bit earlier, getting myself a sandwich, and setting myself up for success. So like, I think that the more you can hear, like, you can't hear that deep self that might be saying, give him back. But you can hear the deep self that is saying, I'm not comfortable right now, and I'm like, this has been long enough, and I'm gonna go. I just would really strongly advise finding that rhythm of visiting that you can stick to and feel good about.
That's so funny you say that. I'm spending weekends, right? Like I've spent 2 weekends, and I definitely felt this last time that it was too much. And I also don't eat the whole time that I'm there. It's just so crazy how you you like suppress everything that makes you a person or human.
Yeah. I wanted to not treat myself like a human, because no one was treating me like a human. Like what human gets treated like having their kid taken away and everybody's happy?
Mm.
Yes, it is easier to stop. And I also wanted to say about that meeting with his mom, I was just there's so much in just seeing the humanity of a person. And I'm really wary of like going in either direction of extremeness, of like happy-go-lucky adoptionness, or adoption should never happen. Like but it was powerful to see the humanity of her, which I had forgotten about because I had been spending a couple of years not seeing her. And it was just like, she didn't know what she was doing either. I mean, she was very smart, but this is stuff that's so deep and nobody can know. And as we were talking, there were resonances like I kind of agree, like we both kind of agree about adoption. And that was one of my big questions for her, is like, would you do this again? I didn't get the answer to that. I haven't been quite that brave, but I just sense like she went on a journey too, and also that as we were talking, some stuff was being born, some ideas were being born, and she's like, I need to think about that more, and I need to write this thing, because she also is a writer. And so it's just beautiful to see that people have relationships generate stuff, like you can influence each other as adults. And so that was another thing that came out of that I was like, wait a second, this yeah, that's it.
Did you have a relationship with the adoptive parents like throughout? Like, were you close, or was it just sort of formal arranging visits? Or
it wasn't formal. I hope I didn't make it seem like that. But it was, and I actually would go in their house and I'd actually be relieved if his mom would just sit me down and tell me all the juicy gossip in the family. Just like, this child's doing this, and this, it was just interesting. And it was, she's a really good storyteller, and I could just spend hours, and then I don't have to like go and play Legos with my son, which what on earth does it mean to play Legos with your son that you give up? It just is so hard. So I would get very easily seduced into just hanging out with her.
Mhm.
And she would push me out the door to take a walk with him. The other thing that I didn't mention that they did really well was, I thought they didn't have anything to do, because anytime I visited, they would let me come, and there would be a lot of time sitting on the couch. And I just thought, but they were getting doctorates and being heads of programs and doing, like, there was a lot. So I feel like they did a great job of making space and making me not feel like I was, interrupting their lives in the way that I'm sure that I was.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that they made that space for alone time, because that's something that I don't think I hear very much, even in open adoptions, just where it always seems to be sort of lumped together.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a fear surrounding that. So I like that you mentioned that.
Yeah, for that person who's talking about how do you open it up, that would be something to think about, is like, what are your fears? Like, examine your fears around it, and ensure that those aren't going to drive anything.
Mhm.
Because the fact is, I wasn't going to steal the baby.
Mhm.
And they, or the 17-year-old, and they said that along the way. They were like, the great thing about open adoption is, I know you're not going to. I know you. And so I know that there's not some kind of deceitful thing that's going to happen. And so it's open adoption is relieving.
Mhm. Just so much. Are there any other questions, comments? We're at the right time right now. So I want to leave it open just for a second if there's any last comments. Lots of thank yous.
Yes, love you, Jamie.
Yeah. No, I appreciate this so much. It was great. I think, yes, do a follow-up book or something.
Thank you guys for that energy, because I probably want to hear that. I probably really do want to get forced into doing that.
Well, what struck me, like what I loved about the first, I'm saying first as though there's going to be a second, but I mean, at least at the time, I had not read anything that covered such a span of time. And it was like to watch your son grow up and to realize like, oh, this is what it actually looks like after the part of the story we always talk about. And I just thought that was so valuable, because I had not heard that at all. And so then to take it even further, like, okay, now what does it look like in adulthood and on? It's just, yeah, we need to hear more. Yeah.
And my son has made little suggestions of writing his own.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think he would be fully capable of that, and it would be super interesting to read. But it is like, it's not the question, how do you get through like signing the papers. The question is, how do you get through the next 60 years?
It's a completely lifelong thing. Yeah. Yep. I don't even think you can comprehend that going into it. I really don't think you understand what that means and the implications of that. So, okay, I'm gonna end it here. So thank you so much, Amy, and for everyone coming this Thursday evening to spend together. So
Amber, will I be able to read the messages after?
yes, you should be able to.
Okay, because I wasn't following the chat, but I would like to.
Yes.
Thanks everybody for indulging me on my my presentation. It's a really nice time.
There was my biological father on one side and my biological mother on the other side. And instead of holding my biological sister, they were all like inches and inches away from each other and just cold and just not warm. And it's like, I don't know. When I think about all that stuff, I'm never going to have that kind of relationship I want. So I don't know if I ever want to really move forward and meet with them. It's something I think I have to really, I think I might have to be in a stronger place in order to do that. I think I'm too vulnerable right now. So, well, thanks for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing, Amy. That's such a hard situation. And only you know what you can handle. I think you're right to think very cautiously about it because you have to protect yourself. And it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we have Donna next. And Donna is not only going to share, she's going to close us out with some breathing, which I think is very much in order.
Not sure.
I think there might have, well.
I know. If you want to stay after real quick.
Okay.
Great. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Gotta move people. Oh, I always like to check and see. Oh, wait. How do you,